The weight of borrowed elegance, the evening air felt crisp against Benjamin Hayes's face as he stepped out of the taxi on Broadway. His daughter Lily's small hand tucked safely in his. Above them, the Metropolitan Opera House glowed like a palace made of glass and gold, its arched windows reflecting the city lights in patterns that seemed almost too beautiful for reality. Benjamin tugged at the collar of his rented tuxedo, feeling the stiffness of the starched shirt beneath the jacket that fit just slightly too loose in the shoulders. Lily wore a navy blue dress that had belonged to her mother, carefully altered by Benjamin's own unpracticed hands during late nights at their kitchen table. At 7 years old, she possessed her mother's dark curls and curious eyes, though tonight those eyes were wide with wonder rather than their usual spark of mischief. She clutched a small beaded purse that Benjamin had found at a thrift store, its vintage clasp catching the light as they moved toward the grand entrance. Ah! Teacher's gift. The tickets had come from Thomas Grant, the principal at Riverside Elementary, where Benjamin taught 5th grade English. Thomas had received them from a donor who could no longer attend, and knowing Benjamin's love for classical music, he had insisted Benjamin take them. "You work too hard, Ben," Thomas had said, pressing the envelope into his hands. "Take Lily. Show her something beautiful. Lord knows you both deserve it." Benjamin had hesitated, knowing the world inside that opera house would be far removed from their small apartment in Queens, where the radiator clanked through winter nights and the neighbors' arguments filtered through thin walls. But Lily had been so excited when he told her, practicing her posture and learning to curtsy from YouTube videos, that he could not bring himself to refuse. Echoes of margaritas, they climbed the red-carpeted steps. Benjamin's fingers found the familiar shape of a small leather book in his inner jacket pocket. The cover was worn soft from years of handling, its pages filled with handwritten French poetry and notes in the elegant script of his late wife, Marguerite. She had been a professor of French literature at Columbia University, a woman who could make Baudelaire sound like a love song and turn Proust into a bedtime story. They had met at a bookstore in Greenwich Village 12 years ago. Benjamin had been browsing the poetry section, struggling through a French translation of Rimbaud, when Marguerite appeared beside him. "You were holding it upside down," she had said with a smile that held no judgment, only warmth. Her accent had been like music, each word shaped with care. From that moment, his life had changed. Their courtship had been a lesson in language itself. Marguerite taught him French the way others might share family recipes. With patience and love, through handwritten notes slipped into his jacket pockets, through whispered phrases in the darkness of their bedroom, through the poetry she read aloud while he cooked dinner in their tiny kitchen. By the time Lily was born, Benjamin could dream in French. The golden hall inside the opera house. The lobby stretched before them like something from another century. Crystal chandeliers hung from ornate ceilings, and the marble floors gleamed under soft lighting. Women in evening gowns glided past like swans, their jewelry catching light with every movement. Men in perfectly tailored tuxedos stood in clusters, their laughter low and practiced, holding champagne flutes with the ease of those who had done this 1,000 times before. Benjamin felt Lily press closer to his side. He squeezed her hand gently. "Remember what Mama used to say?" he whispered in French. "Beauty exists everywhere, not just in expensive places." Lily nodded, though her eyes remained fixed on a woman passing by in a gown that seemed to be made entirely of silver thread. They found their way to the grand staircase, following the flow of people toward the theater itself. An usher checked their tickets and directed them to their seats, orchestra level, near the center. Benjamin's heart lifted slightly. These were excellent seats, the kind that would give Lily a perfect view of the stage. The circle of wealth as they settled into the plush red velvet chairs. Benjamin noticed the people around them. To their left sat an older couple, the man's cufflinks probably worth more than Benjamin's monthly salary. To their right, a group of young women in designer dresses were already seated, their conversation flowing in rapid French peppered with laughter. One of them, a striking woman with blonde hair swept into an intricate updo, wore a dress the color of champagne that probably cost more than Benjamin's car. Lily pulled out the opera program from the seat pocket, her fingers tracing the gold-embossed letters. "Papa, what does this word mean?" she asked. pointing to the French title of the evening's performance. Before Benjamin could answer, one of the women beside them spoke in French, her voice carrying just loud enough to be heard. How charming. They give tickets to anyone these days, apparently? Her companion laughed softly, replying in the same language. Look at his tuxedo. I think I saw the same one in a rental shop window. And that little dress so quaint, like something from a costume drama. The blonde woman, who Benjamin would later learn was named Colette Beaumont, leaned back in her seat with an amused smile. At least they are quiet. Though I wonder if they will understand anything. Opera is rather wasted on those who lack refinement. The choice to remain silent, Benjamin's jaw tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. He had heard every word, understood every nuance of their mockery. Beside him, Lily continued to study the program. Blissfully unaware that she and her father were being discussed like curiosities in a museum, his hand moved to the leather book in his pocket, drawing strength from its presence. He could have responded immediately, could have shown them in perfect French exactly how wrong their assumptions were. But something held him back. Perhaps it was the memory of Marguerite's voice saying, "Patience, mon amour. Let people reveal themselves before you reveal yourself to them." Lily tugged at his sleeve. "Papa, that lady has a pretty bracelet. What do the words on it say?" Benjamin glanced at Colette's wrist, where a delicate gold bracelet caught the light. Even from his seat, he could make out the French inscription, though one word was spelled incorrectly. His lips twitched with bitter amusement. "It is supposed to be pretty, sweetheart," he said softly in English. Though his eyes remained on the program in his lap, more laughter rippled from the group of women. "Did you hear that?" One of them whispered in French. "He probably thinks French is just a romance language for tourists. These people have no appreciation for real culture, no understanding of what it means to truly belong in places like this." Colette adjusted her bracelet, the faulty inscription glinting. "My father always says that breeding shows. You can dress anyone in formal wear, but you cannot teach them grace. It is in the blood, the education, the life one is born into." The lights in the theater began to dim, signaling the performance would soon begin. Around them, conversations faded to whispers. The orchestra below tuned their instruments, creating that distinctive cacophony that precedes beauty. Lily sat up straighter, her hand finding Benjamin's. Her excitement palpable despite the undercurrent of tension she could not quite understand. Benjamin took a slow breath, his thumb tracing the edge of Marguerite's poetry book through the fabric of his jacket. In his mind, he heard her reading Verlaine, her voice soft and certain. Here is the poem that speaks truth. Where words become bridges instead of walls. The curtain remained closed, the stage dark, but Benjamin knew that soon enough. Light would flood that space, revealing everything that had been hidden. And perhaps, he thought, tonight would bring revelations beyond just the opera's performance. As the conductor raised his baton, Benjamin made his decision. He would wait. He would let the music speak first. But before this evening ended, these strangers who had judged him and his daughter so carelessly would learn that appearances, like borrowed tuxedos, sometimes hide depths they could never imagine. The first notes of the overture began to fill the hall. Lily's face transformed with joy. In that moment, nothing else mattered. Not the cruel words, not the expensive gowns, not the assumptions about who belonged and who did not. Here, in this space where music transcended language and class, his daughter was experiencing magic, and Benjamin Hayes, public school teacher in a rented tuxedo, held tight to his wife's book of poetry and waited for the right moment to speak his truth. Memories in Marguerite's handwriting, as the orchestra swelled through the overture. Benjamin's mind drifted backward through time, carried on waves of memory as powerful as the music filling the opera house. He remembered the first time Marguerite had opened this very book, the leather-bound journal now resting against his heart. It had been a rainy Tuesday evening in their apartment, 3 months after Lily was born. Marguerite sat by the window, her reading glasses perched on her nose, nursing their daughter while simultaneously correcting student papers. "Mon coeur," she had called to him, her voice tired but warm. "I want to show you something I have been writing." Benjamin had crossed the small living room, settling beside her on the worn sofa they had bought from a second-hand store. Marguerite shifted Lily gently and opened the journal, revealing pages filled with French poetry, some classic verses she loved, others her own original compositions. But what made the book extraordinary were her annotations, written in both French and English, explaining not just the words but the feeling behind them, the cultural context, the breath and pause that made French poetry sing. "This is for you," she had said simply. "For us, so that when I am teaching late or traveling for conferences, you can still hear my voice. So that Lily can grow up knowing both languages." Both parts of herself. Benjamin had not understood then that she was preparing him for something far more permanent than her absence during evening classes. Learning through love there. Nightly ritual had begun that week. After Lily fell asleep in her crib, Benjamin and Marguerite would sit together, the poetry book open between them, a bottle of wine barely touched on the coffee table. She would read a verse in French, her voice giving life to words that seemed to dance off the page. And then she would explain the nuances that made French such a precise instrument for expressing emotion. "French is not just about vocabulary, Benjamin," she would say, her finger tracing the lines of poetry. "It is about the space between words, the music of how syllables flow together. When I say G-time, it is not the same as I love you. There is a weight to it, a formality that makes it more serious, more true." He had been a dedicated student, driven by love rather than academic ambition. He practiced pronunciation while washing dishes, conjugated verbs during his morning commute to school, read French children's books to baby Lily even when she was too young to understand. Marguerite would laugh with delight when he got things wrong, gently correcting his American tendency to rush through the beautiful, elongated vowels. By Lily's second birthday, Benjamin could hold conversations in French. By her third, he was reading Camus in the original language. By her fourth, he and Marguerite would sometimes spend entire weekends speaking nothing but French, turning their queen's apartment into a small corner of Paris. The diagnosis Lee was 5 when Marguerite began feeling tired all the time. At first, they attributed it to her heavy teaching load, the stress of preparing students for their comprehensive exams. But the fatigue persisted, accompanied by weight loss and a cough that would not go away. The diagnosis came on a Thursday afternoon in October: stage 4 lung cancer, aggressive and already metastasized. The doctors spoke in careful, measured tones about treatment options, but their eyes told the real story. Marguerite had never smoked a day in her life. She lived for 11 more months. Months filled with chemotherapy and hospital visits, with Lily's confused questions about why Mama was always sick, with Benjamin learning to be both mother and father while his heart slowly shattered. Through it all, Marguerite insisted on their evening poetry sessions. Even when she was too weak to sit up, she would have Benjamin bring the journal to her bedside, and she would listen to him read, correcting his pronunciation with a gentle touch to his hand. "You must promise me," she had said one night near the end, her voice barely a whisper, "that you will keep teaching Lily both languages. Promise me she will know her French heritage, that she will read these poems and hear my voice in them. Promise me that language will keep us all connected, even when I cannot stay." Benjamin had promised through tears. It was a vow he had kept every single day since the present moment. Return's a particularly moving aria brought Benjamin back to the present. Beside him, Lily sat entranced, her small face tilted toward the stage where the soprano's voice soared through the golden hall. On his other side, Colette and her friends continued their whispered commentary in French, apparently confident that their words remained private. "This production is adequate, I suppose," Colette was saying, examining her manicured nails with mild interest, "though I saw it done better in Paris last spring. The soprano is technically proficient, but lacks true emotional depth. Then again, what can one expect from an American production?" Her friend nodded in agreement. "At least the orchestra is decent, though I wonder if everyone here can truly appreciate the nuances. Look around at some of these people. They probably think opera is just loud singing." Another woman chimed in, her gaze drifting dismissively toward Benjamin and Lily. That man beside us keeps touching his jacket pocket. Perhaps he is worried someone will steal his wallet. As if anyone here would bother. I doubt he has anything worth taking. The cruelty of the comment struck Benjamin differently this time. Not because it hurt him. He had long ago learned that his worth was not determined by his bank account or the origin of his tuxedo. But because he suddenly saw Marguerite in his mind, standing before her university classroom, teaching young women, exactly like Colette, about the responsibility that came with privilege and education. Language, Marguerite had often told her students, is the most powerful tool you will ever possess. It can build bridges or burn them. It can heal wounds or inflict them. Every time you speak, you choose which kind of person you will be. The poetry book's purpose during intermission, the lights rose and people began standing, stretching, moving toward the lobby for champagne and conversation. Lily turned to Benjamin with shining eyes. Papa, it is so beautiful. Mama would have loved this. Yes? Yes, ma chérie, Benjamin replied softly, his throat tight. She would have loved sharing this with you. He pulled the poetry book from his pocket, opening it to a page marked with a pressed flower, a violet that Marguerite had picked during a walk through Central Park the spring before her diagnosis. The page contained one of her favorite poems by Paul Verlaine, Chanson d'automne, the autumn song. Beneath the printed verse, she had written her own translation and a note in her graceful handwriting. This poem is about the violence of time, how it separates us from what we love. But Benjamin, remember that words preserve what time tries to take. In this book, I am always with you. What does this one say, Papa? Lily asked, pointing to the French verses. Benjamin began to translate, his voice low and careful, speaking in French first and then English, just as Marguerite had taught him. As he spoke, he noticed Colette had returned to her seat and was listening. Though she pretended to check her phone, the long sobbing of autumn's violins wounds my heart with monotonous languor, he recited, the French flowing from him with the accent Marguerite had spent years perfecting in him. When the hour strikes, I remember old days and I weep. And I let myself go on the ill winds that carry me here and there, like a dead leaf. Lily listened with the serious attention she always gave to her mother's poetry. That is sad, Papa, but also beautiful. Like remembering Mama. Exactly like that, sweetheart. The moment of truth, the lights began to dim again, signaling the second half was about to begin. As people settled back into their seats, Colette leaned toward her friend, her voice dripping with false sympathy as she spoke in French. How touching. The little girl thinks she understands poetry. Though I suppose it is sweet in a simple way. At least they are trying to expose her to culture, even if they cannot truly comprehend it themselves. Her friend suppressed a giggle. Did you see his face when he was reading? So earnest, like a child reciting for his teacher. I wonder where he learned his French. Probably from some basic language app. The pronunciation was almost correct, but you can always tell when someone lacks true education. There is a certain refinement that cannot be taught, only inherited. Colette adjusted her bracelet again, the one with the misspelled inscription. Precisely. My father always says that real culture is in the blood. These charity ticket programs are kind, I suppose. But they remind people like us of the difference between those who belong in places like this and those who are merely visiting. Something inside Benjamin crystallized. He thought of Marguerite standing before her classroom, her voice firm as she corrected a student who had made a dismissive comment about working class. Immigrants trying to learn French? Every person who tries to speak another language, she had said, is building a bridge to another human heart. If you use your language skills to mock them instead of welcome them, then you have learned nothing from me, and you disgrace everything this university stands for. The orchestra was tuning again. The conductor stepped onto the podium. In 30 seconds, the music will begin, and the moment would pass. Benjamin made his decision. He turned in his seat, looking directly at Colette for the first time. When he spoke, his French was flawless, carrying the precise Parisian accent that Marguerite had possessed. The result of years of patient teaching and love-driven practice, his voice was quiet but clear, meant only for Colette and her group, but carrying the weight of absolute authority. Excusez-moi, mademoiselle, he began, and watched with grim satisfaction as Colette's eyes widened in shock. "I could not help but overhear your conversation this evening. Your French is quite good, though I noticed your bracelet contains a small error. The word should be lumière, not lumière. An accent makes all the difference, as I am sure your teachers told you." The color drained from Colette's face. Her mouth opened, but no sound emerged. Her friends froze, champagne glasses halfway to their lips, their expressions shifting from amusement to horror. Benjamin continued, his tone remaining gentle but firm. "You quoted Baudelaire earlier when you said that breeding shows. But you misquoted him. The actual line is, 'Grace is what remains when pride has departed.' Perhaps you were thinking of a different poet." He paused, letting the words settle, watching as understanding dawned across their faces. They had been speaking freely all evening, secure in the belief that their language created a private space. Now that privacy was shattered, and with it, their sense of superiority. "As for your comments about my daughter and myself," Benjamin said, his French growing softer, more dangerous in its precision, "you are correct that we do not come from wealth. I teach 5th grade English at a public school in Queens. This tuxedo is rented. My daughter's dress belonged to her mother, altered by my own unpracticed hands because I cannot afford a tailor." Tears were forming in Colette's eyes now. Whether from shame or shock, Benjamin could not tell. Around them, other patrons had begun to notice the exchange, though they could not hear the words over the orchestra's final tuning. "But you are wrong about one thing," Benjamin continued, his hand moving to rest on the poetry book now sitting openly on his lap. "We understand every nuance of this opera, every layer of meaning in the French libretto, because my late wife dedicated her life to teaching language not as a weapon, but as a gift. She believed that anyone who took the time to truly learn could appreciate beauty, regardless of where they came from or what they wore." The conductor raised his baton. The hall fell silent in anticipation. Benjamin's final words came in a whisper that somehow carried more weight than any shout could have. Her name was Professor Marguerite Beaumont-Hayes. Perhaps you have heard of her. Yes. The name hung in the air like a bell's resonance. Benjamin watched as recognition exploded across Colette's face, followed immediately by the crushing weight of understanding. The conductor's baton fell. The music began, but Colette sat frozen, staring at Benjamin as though seeing a ghost, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her like autumn leaves in an ill wind. The name. That changed everything. The orchestra's opening notes of the second act filled the theater. But Colette Beaumont heard nothing except the echo of that name in her mind. Professor Marguerite Beaumont-Hayes. The same woman who had taught her freshman literature seminar 6 years ago. The same woman whose class had been the most challenging and transformative of her entire university experience. The same woman she had admired, feared, and ultimately loved like a second mother during that difficult first year away from home. Colette's hands trembled in her lap. She remembered now with painful clarity. Sitting in that seminar room with its tall windows overlooking the Columbia campus, listening to Professor Beaumont-Hayes read Rambo with such passion that the words seemed to catch fire in the air. She remembered the professor's patient corrections of her pronunciation. Tationed, delivered with kindness rather than condescension. She remembered the afternoon she had broken down crying over a failed exam, and how Professor Beaumont-Hayes had made tea in her office and talked about failure being the foundation of growth. Most of all, she remembered the last day of class, when the professor had looked around the room at her students and said something that Colette had written in her journal that night. "You are learning French not to separate yourselves from others, but to connect with them. If you use your education to build walls instead of bridges, then I have failed you. Language is a gift meant to be shared, not a weapon meant to wound." Beside her, Colette's friend Marie whispered urgently in French, "Did he just say Marguerite Beaumont?" The professor. "Is he serious?" Colette could not respond. Her throat had closed completely. On stage, the soprano was singing an aria about lost love, and the irony was almost unbearable. She had spent the entire evening mocking a widower and his motherless child, never knowing she was actually mocking the family of the woman who had changed her life. Father's quiet dignity. Benjamin returned his attention to the stage. Though he remained acutely aware of the turmoil he had caused in the seat beside him, he had not spoken out of cruelty or revenge. He had spoken because Lily deserved to sit in this theater without being made to feel lesser, because Marguerite's memory deserved to be honored, and because sometimes the kindest thing you can do is hold up a mirror to someone who has lost their way. Lily leaned against his shoulder, completely absorbed in the performance. She understood perhaps half of the French being sung, but her emotional comprehension was perfect. When the soprano's voice cracked with grief, Lily's eyes glistened with tears. When the tenor sang of hope, her face brightened. This was what Marguerite had wanted, for their daughter to experience beauty in all its forms. To understand that art transcended class and money and borrowed formal wear during a particularly quiet moment in the music. Benjamin felt rather than saw Colette turn toward him. Her movement was hesitant, almost fearful. When he glanced her way, her face was streaked with tears that she had not bothered to wipe away. Her lips formed silent words in French. "I am so sorry. Please, I am so sorry." Benjamin gave her a small nod, acknowledging but not yet absolving. Some lessons needed time to settle, like sediment finding its place at the bottom of a stream. The scholarship fund at the next intermission. Before Benjamin could stand, a distinguished older gentleman approached their row. He wore a tuxedo that fit perfectly because it had been tailored specifically for him, and his silver hair gleamed under the chandelier lights. Benjamin recognized him immediately from photographs, though they had never met in person. Jean-Pierre Beaumont, Colette's father and owner of the Beaumont Hotel Empire. "Monsieur Heiress," he said in French, his accent thick with the southern regions of France. "May I have a moment of your time?" Benjamin stood, gently telling Lily to stay in her seat. They moved slightly away from the crowd, to a quiet corner near one of the grand windows overlooking Lincoln Center. Jean-Pierre's expression was difficult to read, equal parts dignity and distress. "I must apologize for my daughter," he began, then paused, correcting himself. "No, that is insufficient. I must apologize for myself for raising a daughter who could behave with such thoughtless cruelty. Colette just told me what happened, what she said to you. I am ashamed." Benjamin started to respond, but Jean-Pierre raised a hand, asking for permission to continue. "You may not know this, but your wife's work has touched my family deeply. 3 years ago, after Professor Beaumont Hayes passed away, the university established a scholarship fund in her name for students from underprivileged backgrounds who show exceptional promise in language studies. My family donated the founding endowment, $1 million, because Marguerite had transformed Colette during a time when my daughter was lost, arrogant, and empty despite all her advantages." The older man's voice grew thick with emotion. "Your wife taught her that privilege was a responsibility, not a right. That education was meant to serve others, not elevate oneself above them. For 1 year, I watched my daughter become the person I had always hoped she would be. And then, apparently, I watched her forget those lessons. That failure is mine." Benjamin felt his own eyes sting. He had known about the scholarship fund. Columbia had sent him a letter about it. But he had not known the Beaumont family was behind the donation. The revelation added layers of bitter irony to the evening's events. "Your daughter is young," Benjamin said quietly in French. "We all lose our way sometimes. What matters is whether we find it again." Jean-Pierre studied him with respect that seemed to age the older man's face. "You are generous, far more than we deserve. Marguerite chose well when she chose you." The poetry book's final purpose, they returned to their seats as the lights dimmed for the final act. Colette was waiting, her posture smaller somehow, as though shame had physically diminished her. As Benjamin sat down, she reached out tentatively, touching his sleeve with the lightest pressure. "Monsieur Hayes," she whispered in French, "I know I have no right to ask, but may I see it? The book you have been holding?" Benjamin hesitated, his hand instinctively protective over the leather journal. This was his most precious possession, the last tangible piece of Marguerite beyond photographs and memories. But then he remembered what his wife had always said. "Books are meant to be shared, Benjamin. Words die when we keep them to ourselves." He handed it to Colette, watching as she opened it with reverence, her fingers trembling as they traced Marguerite's handwriting. She found the page with the Verlaine poem, reading the French verses, and then the English translation below. When she reached Marguerite's personal note at the bottom, fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I remember when she taught us this poem," Colette whispered, her voice breaking. "She said that autumn was about letting go of things we love, but that through poetry, through language, we could hold on to them forever. I wrote that in my notes. I thought I understood it. But I didn't, not really. Not until now." She closed the book carefully, returning it to Benjamin as though it were made of glass. "She wrote something for me once at the end of that semester. I still have the card she gave me. She said, 'Colette, you have learned the vocabulary and grammar. But now you must learn the most important lesson, that every person you meet is fighting a battle you know nothing about. Speak kindly, especially when you think no one is listening, because someone always is." Colette looked at Lily, who was watching them with curious eyes, not fully understanding the adult conversation but sensing its importance. "Your daughter has her mother's eyes," she said softly, switching to English for the first time, "and I think her mother's grace. She has been kind to me all evening, even when I did not deserve it." It was true. Earlier, when Colette had dropped her program, Lily had immediately picked it up and handed it back with a smile. Small kindnesses that Benjamin had not even noticed, but that Colette had apparently been collecting like stones of guilt. The final act, the opera's conclusion, was magnificent. The soprano and tenor found each other again after trials and separations, their voices intertwining in a duet that spoke of love transcending all obstacles. Benjamin held Lily's hand on one side, and on the other, he felt Colette's presence. Transformed from antagonist to fellow mourner, both of them grieving the loss of the same remarkable woman in different ways. When the final note faded and applause erupted through the hall, people rising to their feet in ovation, Benjamin stood with them. Lily bounced excitedly, clapping her small hands together, her face radiant with joy. This, Benjamin thought, this moment of pure happiness was what Marguerite had wanted. Not revenge on those who scorned them, not validation from those who thought themselves superior, but simply the chance for their daughter to experience beauty and feel joy without shame or limitation as they gathered their belongings to leave. Jean-Pierre approached again, this time with Colette beside him. The young woman's eyes were red from crying, her elegant makeup ruined, but she looked more real than she had all evening. "Monsieur Hayes," Jean-Pierre said formally, "my family would be honored if you and your daughter would join us for dinner next week. No obligations, no agenda. Simply a chance for Colette to know you and Lily better. And perhaps to hear stories about Professor Beaumont Hayes that we never had the privilege to learn." Benjamin looked at Lily, who nodded eagerly, always ready for new friends and adventures. Then he looked at Colette, seeing past the designer dress and expensive jewelry to the uncertain young woman who had just learned a difficult lesson about herself. "We would like that," he said simply. Colette stepped forward, addressing Lily directly for the first time. "Lily, your dress is beautiful. Did your mother wear it?" Lily nodded proudly. "Papa fixed it for me. He is not good with sewing, but he tries very hard." "Then it is perfect," Colette said, and her smile was genuine, transformed by humility into something approaching wisdom. She reached up and unclasped her bracelet, the one with the misspelled inscription. "This was a gift from my father when I graduated from your mother's class. He had it made specially, but he got the spelling wrong. I have never corrected it because it reminds me that even expensive things can be flawed, and that what matters is the love behind them, not their perfection." She held it out to Lily. "I would like you to have it. Not because it is gold, but because your mother taught me that the most valuable things we own are the ones that carry meaning. This bracelet should belong to someone who understands that. Someone who will wear it and remember that kindness is more precious than any metal." Lily looked at her father for permission. Benjamin nodded, his throat too tight for words. As Colette fastened the bracelet around Lily's small wrist, Benjamin saw his wife in both of them, in Lily's gracious acceptance, in Colette's hard-won humility, walking home later. As Benjamin and Lily walked through Lincoln Center toward the subway station, the autumn air cool and clean around them, Lily held up her wrist to watch the bracelet catch the streetlights. Papa, she said thoughtfully. That lady was mean at first, but then she was nice. Why did she change? Benjamin considered his answer carefully, wanting to be honest but appropriate. Sometimes people forget important things, sweetheart. They forget to be kind, to think about how their words affect others. But when someone reminds them, when they remember what really matters, they can change. That is what happened tonight. Did Mama teach her to remember? Yes, Benjamin said, his voice soft with wonder and grief and strange joy all mixed together. Even now, your Mama is still teaching people. That is the magic of words, of poetry, of language. It lives on after us, helping people find their way home. Lily squeezed his hand. I am glad we went to the opera, Papa. Even though that lady was mean, I am still glad. Mama would be happy we went, yes? Yes, ma petite. Mama would be very happy. They descended into the subway station, leaving behind the glittering world of the opera house for the familiar rhythms of their regular life. Tomorrow, Benjamin would teach his fifth graders about poetry and metaphor. He would grade papers at the kitchen table while Lily did her homework. They would eat simple food and read together before bed, continuing their nightly ritual with Marguerite's book of poetry. But tonight, something had shifted. Not in their circumstances, which remained unchanged, but in the proof that Marguerite's teachings continued to matter, continued to transform lives even in her absence. The borrowed tuxedo would be returned, the expensive world would fade back into distance. But the lesson would remain. As the subway rattled through the tunnels toward Queens, Benjamin pulled out the poetry book one more time, opening to a page near the end. In Marguerite's handwriting, beneath a poem about stars and memory, she had written, Language is the light we leave behind, Benjamin. Teach our daughter to shine hers brightly and trust that it will illuminate paths we cannot even imagine. He had kept his promise, and tonight, in a theater full of strangers, he had witnessed that light reflect back, turning cruelty into compassion, judgment into understanding, walls into bridges. Lily fell asleep against his shoulder during the long ride home. The gold bracelet on her wrist catching the flickering train lights, a small circle of hope in the darkness. Benjamin held her close, the poetry book pressed between them, and thought of his wife's voice reading Verlaine on autumn evenings, the words preserving what time tried to take. In the end, Benjamin realized. This was what Marguerite had been teaching him all along, that love speaks every language, that dignity cannot be rented or bought, and that the greatest gift we can give our children is not shelter from the world's cruelty, but the strength to answer it with grace. The train carried them home through the night. Two ordinary people returning from an extraordinary evening, forever changed by the power of words spoken in love and the bridges they build across every divide.